All right, so today we're going to be jumping into some pretty hot-button political territory with this recent Donald Trump speech in Detroit that seems like everybody's got an opinion on.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that you wanted to try to get a better lay of the land for this election, and it seems like this event that was covered by the Daily Beast is almost like a perfect example
Right.
of how candidates try to target certain groups of voters and use some, shall we say, strategic language.
Absolutely. And I think the choice of venue is really interesting too, right?
Okay.
This wasn't just a rally for his base. He went to the Detroit Economic Club.
I see.
So he's kind of signaling here that he wants to talk about the economy and people's anxieties about it,
Right.
which is a big deal for voters.
Right, especially in a place like Detroit.
Exactly.
And Detroit itself almost becomes like this character in the story.
Yeah.
Because the whole article really focuses on Trump saying that America under Kamala Harris would be like Detroit.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you even make of a comparison like that?
Well, it's definitely a loaded statement.
Yeah.
He doesn't come right out and bash Detroit, but
Right.
he's definitely playing on this image that a lot of people have of the city,
Okay.
struggling with industry job losses and unrest.
Yeah.
It kind of feeds into this bigger idea, whether it's accurate or not,
Okay.
about Democrats not being able to lead in cities.
And it's interesting because he's saying this to a room full of business leaders, right? People who you would think understand economics and how hard it is to turn a city around.
Exactly.
But the article mentions that people actually clapped after he said that.
Yeah.
So how are we supposed to interpret that?
It's tough, for sure. We could say that they all agree with him, but it's probably more complicated than that.
Okay.
It was a business group, and likely a good chunk of them already support Trump.
Right.
These kinds of reactions in controlled settings don't always show the full picture.
So it makes you wonder about how much these events are tailored to a specific audience.
Yeah.
But, okay, so he's already making waves with this Detroit comment, but then he goes on to describe trade deals, and I still can't believe he said this.
What's that?
He uses the word rape.
Oh, boy.
I mean, where do you even go from there?
Yeah, that's something else.
Yeah.
Even for someone who's known to push the limits.
Right.
But you have to wonder what he's trying to do with language that inflammatory.
Yeah.
It's definitely meant to get a reaction out of people.
Mm-hmm.
This feeling of being violated and powerless.
And by talking about trade that way, it's almost like he's making America out to be the victim.
Right. It's like he's saying that America's always getting taken advantage of and that these deals are costing us something precious.
Yeah.
It's a powerful image, even if it's not totally accurate or fair.
It's interesting because on one hand, you could say it's risky to potentially alienate moderate voters.
Yeah.
But then again, this is Trump we're talking about, and it's worked for him before.
And that's what's so interesting about this election. Some people would hear that and think he's finished.
Right.
But others would see it as him being authentic, just telling it like it is.
Right.
It shows just how divided people are.
It feels like it's more than just disagreeing on policy. It's like people have completely different ideas about what's okay to say and what they respond to.
Right.
And speaking of what people respond to the article, make sure to remind us that this all happened in Michigan, which has been a really important state in the last few elections.
Huge. And Trump needs to win those voters back if he wants to win again.
Right.
So everything he does and everything he says matters even more.
And everyone's reaction, too. The article mentions that Michigan Democrats, specifically Representative Shri Thanedar and Governor Gretchen Whitmer, came out swinging against what Trump said.
Right. Their responses are interesting because they show two different ways of handling this kind of thing.
Okay.
Thanedar focuses on defending Detroit and all the great things about it, highlighting its resilience and its contributions to our culture, almost like he's proud that Trump underestimates them.
Like that classic "you don't know us" response.
Exactly. It's a smart move.
Yeah.
It plays on local pride and takes the attack head on. But then Whitmer comes at it from a different angle.
Okay.
She calls Detroit the epitome of grit.
I see.
And basically says Trump could never understand that work ethic.
So it's less about Detroit itself and more about showing the difference in their values?
Exactly. She's trying to make Trump's words sound out of touch.
Oh.
They both try to use his words against him, but in different ways.
Yeah.
They're trying to get different reactions from different voters.
I'm just struck by how calculated everything is.
Right.
Every single word and every response. It's like they're playing chess with language.
That's what makes this stuff so fascinating to analyze, especially in a close race.
Yeah.
How you frame your message, the words you choose who you're talking to, it all matters. And sometimes the most powerful message isn't what you say out loud.
Sure.
It's what people understand underneath the surface. It really is about tapping into these deep-seated beliefs and anxieties that people have. And that comparison to Detroit, whether he meant to or not, it plays on this idea that cities are in decline and that certain policies have failed.
It's like he's using Detroit as a shortcut, right?
Exactly.
Instead of having a real discussion about the economy, he can just say Detroit. And suddenly everyone's thinking about all these negative things.
It's a very effective tactic during a campaign when you want to boil down complicated issues.
Yeah.
But it also oversimplifies things and reinforces stereotypes.
And the article brings up those revitalization efforts in Detroit.
Right.
It feels like things are more complicated than he's making them seem.
Or absolutely. Detroit's had its share of problems, like a lot of cities that used to rely on industry.
Right.
But it's also a city with a lot of fight in it. It's got creativity, community spirit.
Yeah.
To just call it a failure ignores all of that.
It makes you wonder if there's any other way to talk about these things.
Yeah.
You know, the economy, cities getting back on their feet without making these kinds of comparisons.
It's tough for sure.
Yeah.
Because those places, those words, they're so loaded.
Right.
But I think it starts with acknowledging that it's complicated, that there's more to the story.
So instead of just using a city like it's some kind of political weapon.
Exactly. Because when we do that, we forget about the people who live there.
Right.
We're working hard to make things better.
And we miss out on learning from them, too.
Absolutely.
Figuring out what went wrong and how to fix it.
And that brings us back to that rape analogy.
Oh, boy.
Which takes things to a whole other level.
I don't even know where to begin with that one.
Yeah.
It just feels so far beyond what's acceptable.
It is. It's really disturbing, both for what it says about him and for what it could do to his campaign.
What do you mean about what it says about him?
I mean, using a word like that makes light of something really awful.
Right.
Like, he's comparing economic policy to violence.
Yeah.
It's irresponsible.
And you said it could hurt his campaign. How so?
Well, we talked about how that Detroit comment might appeal to some voters.
Right.
But this is different. This could easily turn off moderate voters.
I see.
And even women voters.
Yeah.
Which he needs to win.
It's almost like he's more interested in exciting his base than winning over new voters.
Maybe. But maybe in this political climate, that's a risk worth taking.
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
Does this kind of talk actually help him or hurt him?
Yeah, it's a gamble.
It's interesting, though, because in both cases, the Detroit comment and the rape analogy, he's presenting America as the victim.
That's a good point. It's definitely a theme with him. This idea that America's always getting cheated, whether it's other countries or trade deals or even its own cities.
Yeah, and that message seems to resonate with a certain group of people.
It does. People who feel like the system is rigged against them, that they're getting a raw deal.
Right.
That feeling of being wronged is a powerful thing in politics.
It makes you wonder if there's any way to deal with those anxieties, that feeling of being left behind, without resorting to these same tactics.
There has to be.
Yeah.
Because if we keep going down this road of anger and division, we'll never be able to talk to each other, let alone solve these problems.
Oh. So where do we go from here if this type of rhetoric works so well?
Right.
But it's also so dangerous. Is there another way to reach those voters who feel like they're being left behind?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Because we can't just ignore them or say their concerns don't matter.
It feels like we can't even talk about these things anymore without it turning into a fight.
I think part of it is we're so used to this kind of politics now.
Yeah.
Where you have to tear the other side down to get ahead.
Right. And maybe that works for getting elected. But what about in the long run?
Exactly.
What happens to our politics when this is just how things are done?
It's something we all need to think about.
Because if we want something different, we have to start demanding it.
Absolutely.
And maybe it starts with how we talk about these issues.
Right.
You were saying before how cities get used as these symbols.
Yeah, like shortcuts.
Right. What if instead of using a place like Detroit as an example of what not to be, we used it to inspire people?
Now, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Because Detroit has been through a lot.
It has.
But it's also a city that's always bounced back.
It's the Motor City always coming up with new ideas, new ways of doing things.
Exactly.
And even when times are tough, you can feel that energy, that creativity.
People want to hear those stories.
They do.
Stories about hope and what's possible.
So how do we build a message around that?
Okay.
Around believing that we can overcome these challenges?
I think it would take a huge change.
Yeah.
From the people running for office and from the voters. We have to stop thinking that for one person to win, someone else has to lose.
It's about finding common ground, right?
Yeah. Exactly. We all want the same basic things.
Yeah.
To feel secure about our jobs, to give our kids a good future.
To know that everyone has a chance to make it.
Right. We need to remind people that we're all on the same team here.
Yeah, that we're all connected, and when one of us succeeds, we all do.
That's something I think everyone can get behind.
It's definitely something I'd like to hear more of. So to our listeners out there, the next time you hear someone using a city or a group of people as an example of failure, don't just accept it. Look for the stories of people overcoming the odds, making things better, because they're out there and their stories deserve to be heard.
I couldn't agree more.
And on that note, that wraps up this deep dive. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions and stay curious.